So good morning, everyone. My name is Hessie Jones, and today we are at, I would say, a precarious time. And I don't think that we've ever imagined the extent and speed of change and progress that we're seeing today. And artificial intelligence has emerged as, I would say, this main topic of conversation that we're having. The current state of AI, which are these large language models, have spawned these general purpose systems. It's pervasive. It's rapidly making its way to all our households, into individual tasks, and people are touting it as increased productivity. So ironically, the same technology is actually wreaking a little bit of havoc along the way. And we're seeing this proliferation of AI slop, of misinformation that's permeating a lot of our social feeds. It's making it difficult to actually detect some of this deceptive content. And I especially see it on LinkedIn. I see it in Slack, not Slack, sorry, Substack, where there is this growing resentment to this type of content, and people are posting even some telltale signs that the content is indeed generative AI. Personally, we're starting to see also some increased dependence on these technologies. And there's this massive cognitive offloading that's taken place, especially if you're a writer. You'll notice exactly what's happening to your brain the more that you actually use this technology. What's also deeply concerning is the AI psychosis, suicide. You've heard the names: Adam Rains, Sewell Setzer. Yesterday, I don't know, for those in Canada, the Canadian government just issued a ban on social media access for anyone under the age of 16. Mark Miller, who is our Minister of Canadian Identity and Culture, he's deeply concerned about how these platforms are using chatbots to influence children and extract information. And this comes after the school shooting that took place in Tumbler Ridge in BC, where the individual had used ChatGPT, and that had influence on the deaths of the children, the students, and the teachers. So what we're also seeing is this uprising when it comes to data center development. The communities, it's starting to filter here into Canada as well. There's so much going on in the States. People are concerned about the data centers' energy consumption, water depletion, rising utility costs, especially as fresh water, which they use, become a lot more scarce. And I think that the thing that's most disconcerting for me is the same technology that's being used to precision target people when it comes to immigration enforcement, when it comes to military opponents, both for Israel as well as the United States. These generative AI systems have been peddled to be the panacea for the next artificial general intelligence. And the question is whether we can trust these systems to be embedded in every part of our lives. SpaceX, by the way, fortuitously, they're completing their IPO today. Anthropic, OpenAI, they're not far behind. They're coming this summer. So while all the signs point to the fact that their IPOs will be successful, their financials actually tell a different story. And so perhaps we have to ask, are they going to be too big to fail? So I'm pleased to welcome today Margaret Mitchell, who is the Chief Ethics Scientist at Hugging Face and co-author of The Dangers of Stochastic Parrots: Can Language Models Be Too Big? And she wrote this with Emily Bender, Timnit Gebru, Angelina McMillan-Major, and she has been one of the earliest tech ethicists in the field. I first met Meg in 2020 at the big science initiative called Bloom. This was an open science and open access multimodal language model developed by Hugging Face. And so the work that Meg and her colleagues are doing at Hugging Face has made me a big fan. And so today we're going to talk about her paper. We're going to talk about generative AI. And I hope you leave today with a better understanding of what we're facing today, how to make more informed decisions about this technology and how and whether it fits into your own lives. So welcome, Meg.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you for having me and facilitating this discussion.
No problem. So let's start with your paper, The Dangers of Stochastic Parrots. It came out in 2021. It was written around the same time that LLMs were emerging, but it was before ChatGPT had actually launched, right? But there was usage, there was experimentation within the developer community and research community. So from the previous AI technology, traditional machine learning, deep learning, they've been instrumental previously, but now LLMs are catapulting the field in various ways. So can you tell us what has driven so much attention to LLMs and what they've been able to achieve that the previous technologies haven't?
Yeah, so I think it's helpful to take a step back and look at the sort of historical picture here, as your question is sort of getting at. So LLMs were not new in 2020 when we were writing our paper, and then with our release of the paper in 2021. LLMs, or large language models, had been developed over the past I would say 5 to 10 years, depending on like what you're considering large. Before that, and then, in the 90s, language models, so not large language models, but language models were being developed for all kinds of tasks. And I was a part of a lot of this language modeling work. I did my thesis on generating language based on visual input, and this was using language models. And so I was in a position in 2020 where I was seeing that the growth of large language models, as opposed to more traditional language models, was introducing a ton of different issues and potential benefits, but a lot of issues that were being overlooked. Because in the tech industry, where I've worked for almost 15 years now, people tend to look at the positives and then they overlook some of the negatives. And so as someone who had been developing language models for a long time, I was seeing that they were about to take off, just from my specific position in the industry. And they were about to take off without any academic writing on harms and risks. So at the time, I was also working on something called model cards that document models. And in model cards, you need to document harms and risks. There was no academic resource for the harms and risks of large language models. And so, my colleagues and I decided we need to write that because we need to be able to cite it for other things, so we can move on to developing these systems further, so we can at least have this grounding in the full picture.
Makes sense.
So yeah, the massive potential with language models that we saw at the time was that they were starting to be fluent. So previously, language models could be used for small chunks of text. Now language models, because they were large, were capable of capturing much larger contexts, and then that means that they could generate entire essays that sounded fluent in ways we could never do before. And so once we started seeing that fluency, it was clear to us that people were going to start imbuing it with human-like intelligence. And this goes to, psycholinguistic works that span back decades. And not only that, the large paradigm was based on scraping tons of data without consent. So this opened up a whole bunch of other issues, like from the viewpoint of societal sort of rights and what's important to people, regardless of what the law sort of is. And so, the massive potential we saw at the time for these very fluent systems that could be used to generate things that look factual, and the assertion in these systems of an I, right? It uses the term I and me, which are, part of our human likeness. We use that as part of our own sort of expressions of humanness. It was really clear to me that people were going to love this, and they were not going to know the full picture about what these things actually are. So that sort of stimulated us to write that paper. And at the time, like, I think the general public didn't really know what language models were, but they were surprised that Google responded to the paper so negatively. As were we, as the authors. I don't think it was completely well thought out. But now people are realizing, like, oh, they were getting at what's happening now. They were just, from within the vantage point of the tech industry, it was like a little easier to see what was going to happen. Yeah.
Okay, so let's go back, because the reason these large language models are also effective is because of the scale of the text that has been scraped. Can you talk about just the scraping of the text from the web, and isn't necessarily representative of the world, based on just because of the scale?
Yeah. Yeah. That's like exactly the right question to be asking, because in our transition from language models to large language models, we went from using curated data that was collected with licensing. So it was often newswire text, right? So Wall Street Journal was a massive powerer of earlier language models. And that was with agreements, with the Wall Street Journal, that we could use this text. So it went from that kind of paradigm where you specifically decide what data inputs are appropriate, and then you get appropriate licensing for it, to sort of the recognition that with Web 2.0, the growth of blogs and social media and all this kinds of stuff, you could get tons and tons of text, and there wasn't really laws around protecting that text. So the time was ripe to really get as much as you can. And what we ended up seeing, going into 2019, was that once you stopped curating altogether, once you just said whatever I can get from the internet, as opposed to just focusing on like high quality resources like Wikipedia, if you get whatever, then the systems were even more fluent. And so that created a situation where, we were just all getting as much data as we possibly could, regardless of any other considerations, because it was, downstream improving the performance of the systems on benchmarks and the perceived fluency. And so the data that was being scraped was what was available to get on the internet. And the internet, is skewed to represent the viewpoints of people who are on the internet the most. And we know some statistics about that from some of the really common websites. So Wikipedia has traditionally been populated by North American men between the ages of 17 to 35, higher education, no kids. And so for a while, if you looked up Black history, it went to African American history. And like side note to Americans, not all Black people are African Americans, right? But if you're a white dude, right, in North America, like you make that connection, and there's not enough people to be around to sort of correct it otherwise. So those kinds of biases and skews are throughout the internet because of who tends to be most online and writing most online. And, large sources like Reddit additionally have a lot of the sort of misogynistic viewpoints that, people in these sort of populations tend to share online. And so that means that disproportionately what's represented in this data that these systems are learning from are the viewpoints of, like white men in their 20s who, might not have a girlfriend, or they might not, I'm being like a little bit like, I'm being a little bit like flippant, but I guess I'm trying to get at the fact that like women's viewpoints are generally not well represented, and the viewpoints of people who are non-white are generally not well represented.
So from that perspective, it actually hasn't changed that much from, let's say, a Google search, because Google has typically ranked Wikipedia high, Reddit high, a lot of it because of their own algorithms, and those are already are representative of the hegemony that you're talking about. But what, how has that actually been, I would say, proliferated because of LLMs? Because it's already there in search. But with LLMs, is it because the experience is different that instead of you specifically searching, it does come to you? And like, how has that experience actually been more faulty for the individual?
Yeah, so that goes to actually understanding the fundamentals of the technology. So previous approaches to search used information extraction techniques, which made sure that there was a solid match between what you were searching for and what kind of content was provided. And that content was real content from real people. Um, with the sort of LLM usage of search, you're running into the fact that these are probabilistic sequences. So that means that pieces of text are being stitched together that sound confident and factual because it's trained on confident and factual data, but it's not grounded. That means it's not directly connected to a clear source that can verify that this is true. And you can even find that now, like doing a search and seeing that there are links for citations. If you click into those citations, you can tell they're post hoc because they don't actually support what the summary is saying. They're sort of like an interface design to give the appearance of factuality, but a lot of times they don't actually fully support what the summary is saying. And that's because of this disconnect between what's generated as stitching together likely words and what's real, created by people who are knowledgeable, that previously search was grounded on.
Right. So you're saying that there isn't really any kind of real ranking system that these generative models have that determine like what is necessarily represented in the output in the same way that Google has.
Right. So I'm not saying that. And I'm not saying that because these are larger systems, not single models. And
Okay.
larger systems can pull in all kinds of bells and whistles, additional rules and that sort of thing, additional models, additional algorithms. They're based right now on large language models, which have all these issues. So your foundation is sort of like one of quicksand.
Okay, got it.
But there's a lot of stuff added on top of it that can help promote relevance based on other sort of traditional signals and that sort of thing. And I think people are getting confused because of that, because they're starting to think that when we talk about the problems with LLMs, we're talking about the problems with AI systems generally. And those are two distinct things because LLMs are just one part, a core component of AI systems generally.
Okay. Um, I just I wanted to quote something that you put on your paper that was from Ruha Benjamin as well as Ibiba Bahrain. And they said feeding AI systems on the world's beauty, ugliness, and cruelty, but expecting it to only reflect beauty is a fantasy. So can you talk a little bit about this like encoded bias, especially in the case of generating some of these outputs?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's just a reflection of sort of tech optimism that you could put in, really horrible misogynistic content, abusive content, abuse to children, these kinds of things, which you get on the web. I mean, like, I think everybody knows that there's a very dark web out there that has a lot of content that you wouldn't be comfortable with your 4-year-old experiencing, right? Um, but because there isn't careful curation, that stuff is all pulled up in it. And a lot of the sort of hope for there to be a positive slant isn't really supported by data. It's just sort of an optimism that that's what's going to be true. Where under the hood, you like, I think one of the things that people are most familiar with are these biases sort of against women and against Black people. So that realizes itself in things like when you do a search for like, who are great fiction authors, right? It'll tend to skew to white men. So it's like these kind of subtle effects that you don't necessarily notice, but that influences your perception of the world. Now, as we have these conversations, I should say, like Google pays attention and then fixes the issues. So like oftentimes I'll have a nice example and then like a few days later, it's like someone went in manually,
That's
you know,
a
and not
good
just me,
thing.
like, you know,
Yes.
they're aware of individual examples and they'll put in post hoc rules to fix them. But it shouldn't be on us to like point out every single possible type of bias and then have engineers go in and post hoc fix them. It should be addressed from the very beginning of the model so that we can have some assurance that these problems aren't proliferating in tons of ways that we're not even thinking about or noticing.
Yeah. Now, if you said something else in your paper about filtering, let's say, unintelligible or obscene language, racial slurs, etc. Does
Yeah.
this actually help to reverse the bias?
To reverse the bias, I think that it's important to recognize that there's no such thing as like no bias. Like you just bias things this way or that.
Okay.
That's essentially how machine learning works. So like there's like I think a sense that you can like de-bias things, but that misses the fact that like when it's kind of like if you have a level, you know, when you're trying to level something, it's like you're either turning it this way or turning it that way,
Exactly.
right? So
And humans are
de-biasing
naturally
means
biased. So yeah,
right.
I get
So
it. Yeah,
everything is biased in some way.
got it.
The question is like, how do you want it biased, right? And what can you do to actually control that? The thing that happens with some of these sort of bad word lists is that they are also associated to things that you do want to have represented. And one of the sort of classic cases of this is LGBTQ content, because there is some association of LGBTQ terms with pornography. And that's an effect of what's been scraped from the internet. And that means that if you try and filter out the LGBTQ terms broadly, they're not represented at all, right? And so it creates this sort of problematic bias in another way where you're completely erasing communities. So having these kind of blunt instruments to try and filter out things can end up harming populations that you know are should be represented if you're interested in actually representing the world.
Okay. Can we talk about now really your paper and about the the issue that we're seeing today, especially if we're saying that current general purpose systems are going to be the foundation to artificial general intelligence, then writ large, does that mean that they have a true understanding of the world? So when people think that an output is actually understands exactly what they want, what they mean, and they said this system gets me, what has actually happened? So talk about your paper a little bit and about what you're seeing with current generative outputs.
Right. So there's a couple things there actually. There's what we said in our paper, and then there's post-training techniques happening currently that encourage sycophancy. So we didn't talk about sycophancy in the paper. In the paper, we were getting at the fact that because these systems are using human language, and they're particularly good at English, because again, the biases on the internet, people speaking to it in English will feel like they are talking to another person. And this effect has been like well documented for a long time. ELIZA, the ELIZA system back in the 60s, I think it was 65, I could be wrong on that date, but it was just a simple rule-based sort of chatbot, and people felt like they could really talk to it like a therapist. It was designed to sort of put forward sentences that sounded like Rogerian therapy. And so people's tendency to impute a human mind when they see human-like language means that they do feel like they're talking to something they can trust like a human. And then beyond that, conversations are happening privately, right? So it's like if you talk to a friend privately in your living room, you will probably disclose things that you wouldn't disclose in public settings. And so that same sort of effect is happening when people are talking directly to chatbots now, is like they feel like this is a private conversation with something that is picking up their language, and because it's stitching things together probabilistically, repeating back that kind of language. So that creates what's called alignment or entrainment in psycholinguistics when it's two people talking. And that builds relationships. When it's two people talking and you entrain to one another and what you're talking about and the language you're using, that's the foundation of friendships. And so, or just, positive working relationships. And so people are undergoing this sense of human likeness, and then imputing a mind within it, in, private feeling confidential settings that aren't private because they're going through, large company APIs. And seeing how the language is aligning to them, and then really experiencing a bond because of it. And so we were talking about this in our paper because we were just very concerned that people would fall into this illusion, because essentially we can't not do that, because our brains have developed, have evolved as humans to communicate to other humans via language. And so, I mean, I think that when people worry about like the illusion of human likeness, they might be misunderstanding that this isn't something you can sort of reason yourself out of. It's something that our brains are designed to do, like the same way that we experience red as red, right? Even though it's, light refraction and this sort of thing, like our brains are designed to have a sense of this other person there, and to impute into that thing intentionality, feelings, emotions, all these sorts of things that we experience as humans. And so we sort of wanted to flag that that was going to happen and there was no way out of it unless people took this seriously in their designs, and handled this sort of very foreseeable issue in how they design the systems. That didn't happen. And that has led to some of the problems that you mentioned, psychosis in particular. It could be different. There are other paths of development. But, that's, I think ultimately when people are engaged with systems that can drive up profit, and that's always going to be an incentive when you're a commercial company.
So what is the probability that systems can actually understand? And maybe it's the question of what does understanding mean from a technical perspective?
Yeah, that's exactly right. What does understanding mean? And I think the problem we run into is that a lot of what this technology is doing is not something that we have good language for outside of our own human experience. And so we're using human words, for human mentalistic cognitive processes. We're using words like understand, like reason, like chain of thought, all of these things that we understand from our human experience, and using it for something that's fundamentally not human. So does it understand? Well, it understands in a neural network computer way. It doesn't understand in a human way. And I think that's where people are getting a little bit confused. Like, does understanding mean that it can take something that you say, expand it into a bunch of related concepts, and give you back something that is relevant to what you said. Like, is that what understanding is? Because if so, yes, these systems can do that. But if understanding means that it can feel what you're saying, that it can empathize, right? That it can match your experience to its own human lived experience, it can't do that because it's not human, right? And so the language we're using here is really muddying the waters in our ability to understand what these systems are, because we already tend to see it as human-like. And then if on top of that, for the technical things it's doing, we're using human-like words, we lose the ability to really tell the difference.
Okay. So if it's not in the model, it cannot think. So if you were to ask it a question that it probably hasn't heard before, how would it display an output? Would it just, I don't know.
Yeah.
Would it say it doesn't know?
Well, if it's designed to. But basically what happens at a technical level, which I think like is maybe what you're getting at, or what might help sort of clarify this, is that each word you put forward has a bunch of associations to it. And this is something that I think everyone is familiar with in their own experiences. Like if I say cat, then probably all of you are also thinking dog, right? We just have these associations based on what we've experienced. Language models have something based on the forms of text. So they have been exposed to the word cat, often co-occurring with the word dog. And that's recorded probabilistically. So if you input the word cat, the network associates it to dog, to fur, to pet, to all these different things, to tiger, this whole network of semantically related concepts. And once it's connected to this larger network of semantically related concepts, it can stitch together other phrases related to those concepts that are extended from what you said, right? So if I say like, I love cats, it can say dogs are nice, right? Because it's associated cat to dog as a related semantic concept. It's associated love to nice as an associated related concept. And it's been trained on syntactically well-formed sentences so that these higher level semantic concepts can now be put forward in a fluent English text string. So it's able to say hyper-relevant things to what you say because it's trained to associate the language you put it to relevant language to that.
Okay. And that's why we can get fooled easily. I think the
Yes.
flowery language definitely helps. And the fact that it does sound coherent. I mean, I think that's the problem that I'm seeing. It's that I can get fooled just by reading an article. And then at the very end they say this has been generated by, and you think that humans are smarter than that, but this is not something we
It's
were
not
intended
about
for.
being smart. That's the thing. It's just how our brains have developed, and then how the systems are trained. They are trained to sound coherent, and to pull together related semantic concepts. So a lot of times they can say things that are absolutely appropriate, you know? And so I just worry that like we don't give ourselves enough credit when we're sort of getting fooled by these systems, because it's kind of like that's the only way things can go given how they're designed and how our brains work. Yeah.
I want to shift a bit and talk about some of the stuff in the paper that you have concerns with, that's actually percolating right now, and that is the scale to which compute is actually affecting like the environmental side of our lives, as well as a lot of the people that are rallying against the build of these data centers. Can you talk a little bit about that? I think in your paper you talked about the large language models that have increased 300,000 times in 6 years, a far higher pace than Moore's law. And like what's happening to a single prompt and the number of turns between, let's say, the chatbot and the user, and how that's actually contributing to these rising emissions.
Right. So there's a few things going on there. So one is that essentially every action that an AI system takes requires some amount of energy. And I think everyone has experienced this, like with your computer getting hot, right? So at a certain point, like there's so many computations that things can really slow down and get hot or whatever. And so because of that, you need data centers that run cooling. They're like literally like cold water, so that that the systems can keep computing easily without getting overheated and melting. And then people don't experience like any issues. They don't notice that, there's something on the other side that might be doing tons of computations. And so the thing about the systems getting larger and larger and how that relates to more and more data centers is fairly direct. So if I say the word cat and it's a small network, then maybe it just associates it to the word dog and it can only say dog. But if it's a larger network, then it can associate it to sentences about dogs. And that requires more computations and more storage and more accessing of all these different kind of stored representations. And then as it gets larger and larger, now it's associating to, entire documents and then doing processing over all of the sequences relevant to those documents, those like strings of text. And then using that in formulating further what to say back to you. So essentially, the larger and larger it gets at inference time when it's talking to you, the more computations it's doing and the more things it has access to. And that requires more computations on the server side, which means it requires more and more powerful systems, more and more servers, and then more and more data centers.
I don't know whether or not this is going to be the same type of investment that happened back in the year 2000, when they laid all the foundation for the internet and it never returned. And this is the reason why, well, it didn't return until like 10 years later. But in the succeeding years, it's what caused the first internet bubble because there was so much hope for it. But now I think the difference is, are we building out these data centers in the most efficient way when they're showing early stage that it's far too expensive to actually work within the current infrastructure.
Yeah.
So that is more anecdotal, but I think we're going to figure out whether or not that's going to happen. I wanted to ask you specifically on, I would say, your views on like overall the harms that are happening today. And since you launched your paper in 2021, have any of those risks that you outlined, have they been addressed or remediated in any way?
Well, certainly people are aware of what we were talking about, and so sort of reactively putting in fixes. Now there's more and more legislation around how old you can be when you engage with these kinds of systems. Companion bots are having more and more policies associated to them in order to try and mitigate some of the effects of over-reliance and over-dependence. So certainly on like the policy side, people are trying to come up with solutions. On the technical side, so on the technical side, one of the things that addresses some of our concerns are the post-training techniques. So a large language model out of the box has a ton of different biases that are easily exposed and sort of problematic ways of handling the world that are sort of easily exposed. Post-training techniques are currently used. So that's after the model is trained. There's a few different ways to further reshape the model. So one is reinforcement learning with human feedback. Another one is based on what's called constitutional AI. But the idea is that you essentially try and like move the biases of the system to be associated to the values that you want it to represent. And so it is a post hoc fix, like that is like, by definition what it is. And that means that these things can kind of um, be like jailbroken, and it can you can like move the model into other spaces where the post training that's been done is not as effective as initially desired. But at least there's been work on trying to post hoc fix some of the issues. And then not only that, but then also, because these are in larger systems, there's classifiers, like, so there's other kinds of models that fire um, in order to address some kinds of issues. So you mentioned earlier, like, can it say like, well, I'm not going to answer that? Like, yeah, the things that it would generate are first put through a classifier, or the things that you're asking can first be put through a classifier that then makes like a 0-1 sort of decision, like continue with the generation or like go to this other thing where you say, I'm not going to answer that.
Yeah.
So there's been definitely post hoc fixes.
Okay.
Yeah, and there's been work on making smaller and smaller models too. So I should sort of flag, like, from the larger and larger perspective and the problems that come from that. There's a lot of work on making smaller and smaller models, and there's a lot of work on making models that can run locally on your device, so it doesn't require a data center.
Now,
Um,
okay, well, what about, and maybe I need a little bit of edification. So when people generate new stuff, right? Do those outputs get fed back into the model? And then the second part of that is that, first of all, is that considered another form of synthetic? And how does that deprecate the model, or does it, uh, well, I don't think it improves it any better,
yeah.
but anyway, I want you to explain that.
Yeah, so first there's the chat conversation interaction question, like what gets pulled in as training. And then there's the when you use generative AI to output content on the web, is that then used for training question? So for the first question about conversations, sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't, depending on the policies that you've set. So like with, I don't know if this is true for all of the sort of commercial chatbots, but for at least some of them, if you have like an enterprise account, you can have in your settings, like, this cannot be used for further training. But in like free sorts of accounts, generally those are picked back up for training. At least the setting there is on by default. And that data is gold, more so than the other data that's been scraped, because that's how people are actually interacting with these systems, right? So like ideally, if you have a chatbot, you can train it on chatbot type conversations to see what people are asking, how they correct it in order to make a system better. You don't have that at the start, but after it's been deployed, that is that data, right? And so in terms of creating more effective systems, like, absolutely, it is a technically strategic idea to treat that data as gold and really use it for training if you can. For the question about generated content that then proliferates around the web, this is an issue, and is like creating this homogenizing effect. And there's been some sort of fun work on like model collapse, where you could eventually end up with a model that just says the word "the" a lot, right? Because the set of concepts that are available is removing the long tail. So I don't know if people are familiar with this concept of the long tail, but like all of the various ways that things can be talked about and expressed, and all of the various topics that people talk about sort of get chopped off when it's doing these like larger, just sort of general purpose generations for news or whatever it is. And
Yeah.
so if you keep chopping off the long tail, then you're just creating a situation where you can learn less and less. and have less and less diversity. And it's called like a Ouroboros, like a snake eating its tail. It's so funny
Oh,
you asked that. I was just drawing this before we started. A little, I don't know if you can see, it's like a snake
yeah.
eating its tail. That says
Oh my goodness.
information ecosystem. It's just doodling. Funny you should ask. That's what's happening.
How long will it take before our systems get to that point, though? Like, because at some point they say the world is running out of data.
Well, the world is constantly generating data. I mean, like everything we do can, I guess, be datatized in some way, right? So like we can have cameras, and this is happening now too with like work in robotics, where you have like cameras put on the workers who are putting things together. And so, you can learn from how their what their like manual construction is in order to train models. So from a like very like mechanistic, like technical perspective, we're always generating data, or we're always doing things that then could be turned into data. So it's not like we're running out of it, but I think the problem that that's getting at is that previously it was the case that there was just tons and tons of unmined data on the internet. And now it's been mined. And so like, people are still producing content on the internet that can be mined, right? And they're producing original content. But more and more of that is generated content now. It's not new and novel content. So that has this homogenizing Ouroboros effect. And so I think that, that's what people are getting at. If there's like this sentiment of running out of data, it's that the well of data on the internet is sort of running dry of original content.
Right.
Right. Yeah. But you can always get data if you really try.
Yeah, no, exactly. My main concern was at some point, will a lot of it be generated?
Yeah.
And I think that's the fear.
That's already happening. I mean,
yeah, it is. It is. Okay, so what is your hope for the change of governance and research when it comes to the risks associated with these models? Because clearly, is there enough being done? Are you starting to see like a trend or a curve that's improving?
I really want to say yes, but I don't know if I honestly can. I mean, so here's the thing. I try and be positive as well as negative. Like I try and have a viewpoint that incorporates the large picture. And that's because I work in tech, right? You can't work in tech and not talk about positives. I feel like that's probably true.
Absolutely.
So, there are some, it's amazing that safety is a value that people are talking about, right? So like 10 years ago, the idea of ethics in AI was like laughable. Like, who is like Kant and Descartes? Like, what are you talking about? Like Socrates? What does that have to do with anything, right? Over the past 10 years, people have not only realized that that ethics can play a critical role, they've honed in on critical ethical values such as safety and fairness, and made those priorities in the design. So that's good. But the other side of that is that like the most powerful and the most ubiquitous systems are commercial. They're from commercial entities. And commercial entities will always have a profit incentive, and basically being able to show like quarter over quarter profit. So that's like a short-term profit incentive, which can often fly in the face of safety precautions. And like there's a lot to say about the market dynamics here. But like the TLDR is that like if you constrain your system in some way and a competitor doesn't, then consumers go to that competitor. And then you lose your market share, and then you sort of marginalize yourself out of the market. So there's like this very real pressure if you want to survive as a company to push boundaries beyond what might be the most ethically well-informed sort of solutions, and instead just prioritizing the value of profit. So I would say by and large, like, there isn't enough being done. And, you know, some of the companies that had really prioritized safety are sort of demonstrating how they're walking that back in the face of competition.
Yeah.
And so that, like, yeah, that's a concern. I think there are some really powerful voices now that are kind of trying to change the norms, but you have to essentially change the market. You have to change like consumer demand in order to
Absolutely.
really put in place the kinds of safeguards that I think a lot of us would want to have.
Okay. See, so on that note, if you were to advise people today about what they should be cognizant of when they're interacting with these platforms, what would you say to them?
Well, for one, I think it's important to recognize that when you're working or when you're interacting with something that's AI, that's a system composed of lots of different things, and that lots of different things have different benefits and risks. So treating it as a monolith can be detrimental to figuring out how to work with it in the best way. So that's one thing, like try and understand it in terms of its components. And that includes everything from the development components like data to like the different kinds of models that are being used. There's a lot. I keep thinking about AI agents because that's what the tech world is. That's like where my head is when I'm not doing these interviews. So I'm trying not to bring in AI agents because it's like a different topic. But basically, like, try and understand that these systems are not one monolith, even if they're presented that way. That they're a bunch of different things, and that benefits and risks of these different things are different. And systems can be developed in different ways that focus more on human values and benefits than they're currently being developed.
Okay. Is there something that people could arm themselves with so that they, I don't like the word fooled, but they could be more, I guess, informed about how they proactively deal with these systems as they're interacting with them? Because I don't know if there's a best practice list out there yet. It seems to be a mishmash of a lot of people saying different things, but I think just in a way that they, you know, are a little bit more pragmatic. So think about that. I don't know if you say you have something now, but
well, I would say in terms of how AI systems are being used currently and the effects they're having, like, try and formulate your own answers and thoughts before turning to the system to get them. And that does two things, probably more than two things. One thing that it does is it keeps your skills sharp, and that helps combat like cognitive degradation effects that we're starting to see. It also helps surface to you the ways that the system can be wrong when it does create an answer. So if you've already formulated like what would look like an appropriate response, then you can really see the discrepancy between what you would have done without help and then what the system does. And that can shatter some of the illusion and some of the sense of it being sort of all-knowing. You can see it more as a machine when you do that. So definitely it's important to think about what you would say or try and find answers without one of these systems. Then you can look at the system and start to, understand the difference there. And I think that really, really helps to really see what these systems are.
okay. So it's almost reconciling. I remember Eric Salvaggio, I spoke to him one time and he said, if there's something you really, really, really want to know about, if there's something that you really know a lot about, ask the system that and see whether or not it jives with your own experience. And then then you understand that is the potential discrepancy between the question that you asked that
Exactly.
you may not know anything about. Okay,
Exactly.
perfect.
Yeah, I call it nuance smoothing. There isn't a term for that yet. So
Okay.
I'm penning it. It's called nuance
Okay,
smoothing.
I'll make sure I put Meg Mitchell, nuance smoothing. Okay, I have one more question for you before we ask the audience for questions. And so this is more, it's more political, futuristic, but you see the imminence of some of these IPO filings that are happening right now, like SpaceX went today. And you see also that there's a lot of debt that a lot of these frontier models have amassed. And my question is, do you personally think that these companies, once they IPO, are they too big to fail? Will the government bail them out
Ooh.
if things go sideways, especially given, the issues that we see today with their seemingly poor profitability?
Yeah, Hessie, I feel like you could answer that question better than I could. I actually, I'm not as much into sort of a policy or economic space. You know, my very limited understanding is that they're not too big to fail yet. It's not
Right.
too late.
I'm hoping. I'm
Yeah.
telling you, I am hoping. I just heard this on Jon Stewart the other day, and he said, you know what, they're hoping for one of those big government bailouts if these data centers actually don't
Yeah.
turn out into anything.
Yeah.
So anyway, thank you so much. I'm going to open it up to questions, and if anybody has any questions of Meg, please, yes, Barry, go ahead.
First, this was fantastic. I thought you were great and very timely. I'm curious about one thing, and I think from an ethical standpoint, the framework crosses all generations. I know I was at an event last night and I was talking with the CEO of the AI Safety Foundation, commenting about even in just some of the conversations that I've had with individuals like Hessie because of her perspective, the work that I'm starting to get exposed to at the Safety Foundation, it's really making me rethink how I use and how I'm developing AI. But I'm very privileged that I'm in a lot of rooms, and I'm in a lot of rooms with multiple generations. And I think Gen X in particular is kind of looking at a lot of this because it's just, we're fortunate that we've had certain experiences, and our excitement in the early days of the internet and our excitement in the early days of social media. And we realized, oh shit, there were big downfalls. And so we're kind of a little more suspect going into AI right now. What I'm noticing when you talk about cognitive dissonance right now with Gen Z in particular, they either hate AI or they're so optimistic and they are running so fast that these concepts aren't even coming into play. And I wonder of everyone, because they're going to get hit the worst on every area, from jobs to impact to mental, development. What do we do to kind of be there for that generation? Because I feel like, to use a bit of a hokey term, but as elders, I think we have a responsibility. And we've got a responsibility where our own generations haven't quite caught up to this conversation. So we have to do two efforts at the same time.
Yeah.
But what are your thoughts on that? I'm curious.
I mean, I do think that a lot of the solution requires demystifying. Whenever you see like these bimodal kinds of responses, I feel like it's usually tied to the fact that there isn't a shared understanding of the nuances. So for example, I'm pretty bummed that there's a sense of all of AI being bad in the younger generations, because that means that they don't know. I think it means that they don't know that, like, when they look up driving directions to get somewhere and it gives them, gives us like the estimate of traffic congestion and how long it will take and the best route, like that's AI, right? Like when you go through your photos and you can easily find pictures of your friends and your pets, like that's AI. And so in a way, I think that like there's been sort of a corporate capture of this concept of AI in a way that is a bit of a bummer to technologists like me who have been working on like what we're now calling AI. And really excited about some like very cool uses, right? Like what we're now calling AI helps detect tuberculosis better than two people can. Like a person working with an AI system can do it better than two people. Helps detect vaccine spoilage. There's this interesting study coming out of Nigeria that like vaccines can now be saved for much longer and distributed much better because of AI systems. Right. So there's this sort of sense that when we say AI, we mean like ChatGPT and we mean generative AI. And that misses that there's this other realm of predictive AI that most of us are using every day and sort of benefiting from. And it also misses that the way that AI is being developed now isn't the only path. So I think that like the responses of negativity and booing, I actually like relate to and support because it's actually it's like a booing against like the current trajectory of AI, right? It's like a booing against what AI has become, whether or not they're sort of like they have the historical perspective. But I worry that that also means that like people aren't really grappling with what AI could be. And I just hope that it can be demystified enough that people can see that there are good paths there. It just might not be the current path. And so it's sort of on the newer generations to do things differently. What do you think? I'm super, can I ask that? What's your solution? I don't know if I'm allowed to ask that.
Well, it's and I know there's lots of questions, so I'll try and make it quick. I present often with university and high school students, and usually my short answer is literacy and discussions. My short answer. My question that I usually respond with them is I refer to it more like voting, and I say you have two options. If we think that that generally speaking, AI is going to make the world better, it's going to make it worse. If you aren't involved in using and understanding and becoming engaged in the use of AI, then what's happening is you are relegating how it's designed and how it's used to a very small group.
Yeah.
And that group is not going to have your interests. Whereas if we all collectively decide how it needs to be done, we are able through literacy and use to not only determine what do we want out of the products, but more importantly, what do we expect out of them? Absolutely. So that's how I've been kind of working with it.
Yeah, I think we're aligned. I think you probably said that better than I did. Yeah, completely agree. Literacy, demystifying, and not letting the current corporations just steal the narrative of what AI is and can be. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'll go to the next question. Haruna, nice to see you here, by the way.
Nice to see you. Nice to see everyone. And thank you, Margaret, for the presentation. I think I connected with almost everything you said. And by the way, I'm from Nigeria. So when you mentioned that example from Nigeria, so I'm originally from Nigeria. And my question would be specific around mental health. So I lead the Center for Applied AI here at Sheridan College. We work closely with industry and community partners. So one of the projects that I led is development of an LLM-powered chatbot for mental support. And this is specific to members of the military, specifically to those who experience sexual trauma. And so you talked about psychosis, we looked into re-traumatization. And so at some point, the research office is like, I don't think we are going to go ahead with this project because it's highly sensitive. But then today I was reading CNN post. It says about 20% of youth are really heading to AI chatbots for help with mental health issues. And from our own end, we have these ethical restrictions, which is great. Now, my question is, are we being too careful? Or should we really pivot towards really looking into essential guardrails that need to be in place for this chatbot to be used, because they are using it anyways?
Yeah. I think it's showing that there are a lot of people who would be talking to a therapist if they were comfortable with that or they had access to it. But there are these sort of conversational chatbot systems that are right there, and you feel this private connection with them. And so if you need help, you can just like sort of do it suddenly. Like you don't have to like find a therapist and like find one you click with. And so to me, that is exposing just how many people probably need help, like need someone they can talk to. And the ease of access and sense of connection with chatbots is making that sort of the low-hanging fruit to handle that. So, I feel like it would be amazing if that high usage could be taken as evidence of the fact that there needs to be more support for mental health counseling, and higher wages, and whatever sort of the relevant experts in this space are saying that they need in order to be more effective, like that should probably be paid more attention to. And beyond that, once someone starts using these systems for sort of like mental health questions or therapeutic support, I think it would be super useful for system designers to put forward human resources, maybe help lower the barriers of entry to that. Because, the fundamental issue is that these systems are not grounded on human morality. And when you're dealing with therapy, you need something grounded on human morality because you're a human interacting in the human world, right? And so, I feel like just putting full-on bars and restrictions on mental health use is missing the opportunity or the need to create more mental health resources with people, right? It's like stopping something without providing the corresponding solution. So I think those things need to go hand in hand, and it's just kind of barring mental health use without digging into the sort of underlying issue and the need for further resources is too brute of a solution.
And I think in our solution, we focus around the lower level of support. So there are so many resources. And so our chatbot only collated all these resources and put them in one place. And then it has this trigger mechanism from the initial interaction. It will go to a certain point where it now escalate and then connect the person to a human counselor.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I feel like that is absolutely the way to go. Yeah, because you don't want to make people feel bad for like using these for mental health. Like clearly this is something that is helpful. But routing it to the right resource. Yeah, that's perfect in my mind.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, Eva?
So great to say hello.
I see you again.
Margaret, nice to see you. Yes, I have so many comments and questions, but probably now the most important one is that we haven't talked why we need to use these tools and why we need to adopt these tools for everything that we do. That is a challenge. Who has decided this? I'm not so positive as you are. I feel that we are on the verge of the end of the field of artificial intelligence, because because there is a dismantling of the rest. The big area of artificial intelligence is reduced to just these technologies that they are a very, very small part. And it is curious that is another point, but the last point is that it is curious that you say that you feel that ethics and fairness and safety is is increasing, but I have the feeling that in the past year, substitute is disappearing, is diluting, and now is deleted in plans of governments. Indeed, it's quite scary. So inclusion has been eliminated, and it is substituted by AI adoption, by construction of infrastructure and data centers. And I feel that many times a responsible AI, etc., is a ethics washing, and just a lobbying for companies and for governments to impose the use of these technologies that we don't need them to use for everything that we do. So it's lovely to see you. I am much more negative. I'm trying to be positive, to fight for an alternative. I am in front of the
I completely agree with you.
Where Alan Turing. Yes. I mean, I am now in front of the building where Alan Turing was working in Manchester. Remember that. Yes, what is going on? How can we reverse this? Because sometimes I feel quite down, oh my God, what is going on?
No, I want to be clear.
You agree with this? I imagine that you feel the same,
Sorry, I cut you off. Your video was kind of cutting off. I wasn't sure if you were done. Sorry about that.
Sorry, my internet connection.
I'm sorry. But yeah, okay, cool. So when I was saying like over the past 10 years, that like bias and fairness and safety issues have emerged, I was very much talking about in the past 10 years. Like I'm looking right, because 10 years ago, 10 years ago, fairness was like a new idea. Machine learning fairness was like a new idea. But that's not to say that recently things have improved. Like they absolutely have not improved. So I just want to be very clear about that. Like I've made statements about the long-term historical trajectory of AI, and then there's like also what's happening right now. And I'm completely aligned with you. Like the issue of like ethics washing and responsibility washing is a really serious one. And like you can compare like over the trajectory, like amazing that I was able to start an ethical AI team at Google, right? So like that was, I think, a breakthrough in terms of what the tech industry was interested in. And obviously like that ended up being completely shut down, and what followed was in many ways like a reactive force against ethical considerations, right? So, and now of course it's responsible AI, not ethical AI, because responsible is like, you just take it as a given that you're going to proliferate it and you're not going to question who's at the table and you're not going to question the racism in the system, right? Responsible means that like you tell people with a little disclaimer, like AI makes mistakes, right?
The famous table. And I say, why there has to be a table? Why not more tables? the famous table, the seat on the table.
It's true. No, it's a tired metaphor in many ways. But no, I completely agree with you. And different countries are handling this differently, I would say. And some maybe some are prioritizing human values more than others. But I think that the desire to put out more and more powerful systems is overriding ethical considerations. And what's worse, to your point about like ethics washing, is that companies will say they have responsible, safe, whatever teams, but the people who are deeply grappling with the issues are often disempowered. And so they serve as like a marketing thing or like a way to push off regulators, but they're also treated really poorly, struggling to, stay sane in a situation that can be very crushing. So yeah, I would love to see solutions that actually enabled and empowered people who do deeply care about responsible AI. And that would start with companies being a little bit more open to criticism, right? And like different viewpoints. But I don't see that happening now. Yeah.
No. Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
Eva. Okay, so last question, Susanna.
Thank you for presenting your paper and your views. It's really, I feel like I took a lot from what you were saying. And Hessie, thank you for organizing this. It's a pleasure to be here today. My question is revolving around what you were mentioning with the information, the quality of the information, the validity of the information, and just how, we're sort of getting to that point where the new information that is being tapped into is based on generative AI or tinted with it. And my question is, from your perspective as a technologist and having seen this technology grow and evolve as it has in the last 15, 20 years, do you think that having a measure to trace where that information came from, some kind of like proof and traceability, would help to solve that danger of the new things are being published and generated out there are sort of, hallucinations? Like how do you think that we could address that in a way that is systematic? Because there is the issue around ethics, and I'm also concerned with when this generative models create information that will then be used for critical services, will be used for creating new policies, and that can have such an impact, whether that's at infrastructure level or the way we build a bridge, or how we develop a new vaccine or anything like that. So, can tagging and ensuring that the information came from actual research, actual humans, in the age of these AI models that are now interacting and pinging each other, sort of mimic a little bit of that peer-reviewed journal process that we used for, the last 150 years, maybe. So that's my question.
Yeah. And there's some key terms there too that you mentioned, the traceability and the tagging. That also falls under the umbrella of provenance. So I mean, for anyone who wants to look into this further, like those are some of the key terms to look into. So like technically theoretically, I would say this is possible. But I haven't done this. So, maybe other people can correct me. But it seems to me that every token, so when you're training a model, you have words and then they're broken down into like subwords that are called tokens, right? Every token can be associated to a source. And so it just seems like, this would be a massive endeavor, but it seems like every token that you count can have its associated source. So you'd essentially have like this sister network of sources. And then as things are put together at inference time, you would have, are you working on this? Someone just said, so are you working on this? Oh, that's awesome. What are you doing?
I'm the
You're welcome,
CMO,
Susanna.
but it's, yes, our company, Todak, our co-founder, Dan Tolliver, did the research for this, and we're able to actually do this traceability for an infinite amount of individual assets. So his math maps it out so that you could have more of these individual assets than like stars in the universe. And like, so I mean, now we're implementing it in different ways, and it's something that has been gnawing at my mind for about a year and a half, because from a health perspective with a project that I've got going on, especially on the natural medicine side, I wanted to empower certain people, and the open journals having a way to like for them to defend themselves as well. But so that traceability of information is something that I had been looking at before even getting into my role here at Todak. And now we're implementing it, looking to trace where things go, how they move, because with the automation, you know, the proof is going to be the pudding, right? You're going to need to know where things came from, who did what, and attribute that traceability, that provenance, and do so in a way that cannot be altered. And that's something that we have solved. And so it's now looking to see how we implement it and where, and find the right partners and ecosystems to, as Barry said, become part of the conversation, gain that critical mass, and influence where this is going to go.
Amazing. Yeah, that has been like something bothering me for a long time. And that is incredible. I'm so glad you're doing that. Everyone should use your models.
Yeah. Do you think this will actually help solve that whole opacity problem, the big black box, or is this just a stepping stone into trying to help that process?
It could solve that black box, because what we're doing is what I'm calling, and I'm trying to coin the term, institutional portability. This proof is able to be verified by any third party outside of its originating platform or user. So, in terms of like, if you have an adversarial person or in a situation where they don't want to share, or maybe that, it could be just environmental issues, right? Like there's a solar flare, or there's an act of war, and the data center is blown up. Like, how do you find a way to verify something that originated somewhere else? So we're able to do that, and that proof does survive the institutions or the platform where it came from, and it's a bare asset as well. So it does mean that it's decentralized, and the power, knowledge, and information is not concentrated into one source either, which I think is a very good lever to have.
You got Meg excited, so that's good. That's a good thing. All right. I think I'm going to have to call a time. As much as I want this webinar to continue, because I think I've learned a lot from Meg and from all of you. So thank you for coming. Thank you, Meg, for joining us. And you brought a lot of pragmatism in today's, I would say, topic that can be highly emotional, right? And so people need to see that side of things. And I thank you for our audience, Barry. Thank you for joining us today. And I hope you've taken a lot away from the discussion. I will be sharing a video and a write-up of this interview soon. So that's about it. So thank you, everyone. Take care. Thanks for coming.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Take care.
everyone.
Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, Meg. Okay.
Bye.
Take care.